I evicted my parents. I still remember the way the words felt in my mouth. Heavy, unreal, as if I were borrowing someone else's voice. The judge didn't look up when I said it. My mother did. Her lips parted. Not in shock exactly, but in something closer to offense, like I'd just violated an unspoken rule of the universe. Parents don't get evicted by their children. Children get reminded of what they owe. I'll come back to that day. To the courtroom, the stale air, the tight set of my father's jaw. But the truth is, none of it made sense unless you knew where I came from, unless you knew who I was to them. I grew up in a house where love had a hierarchy. My older brother Daniel sat comfortably at the top. He was the golden child, athletic, charming, loud in a way that filled rooms. Teachers praised him. Neighbors admired him. My parents spoke his name like a blessing. Daniel has so much potential, my mother would say, smiling at nothing in particular. I was the other one, not invisible. That would have been easier. I was visible in the way a stain on the carpet is visible, noticed only when something goes wrong. I was the scapegoat, the responsible one, the quiet one who understood how things were. When Daniel broke a lamp, it was an accident. When I forgot to take out the trash, it was a character flaw. Money made that difference painfully clear. When Daniel turned 16, my parents surprised him with a used car. I remember standing in the driveway, the smell of gasoline in the air, my father tossing him the keys like he was passing down a crown. "What about me?" I asked later, quietly, in the kitchen. My mother didn't even turn around. "You're more mature. You don't need things like that." That phrase, "you don't need," followed me my entire childhood. Daniel needed new shoes for basketball. Daniel needed help with college applications. Daniel needed a little extra money this month. I didn't need. I adjusted. When it came time for college, my parents paid Daniel's tuition in full. Out of state, private. No questions asked. For me, they slid a pamphlet across the table. "You can stay home and work," my father said, folding his hands. "Save money." I worked 2 jobs. I went to a state school at night. I studied until my eyes burned. I told myself independence was a virtue, that I was building something solid. And maybe I was, but I was also building it alone. Every holiday, Daniel came home with stories of parties and trips. My parents listened like proud investors tracking returns, and I listened too, from the edge of the room. As we got older, the imbalance didn't fade, it calcified. When my grandmother passed away, there was a small inheritance. Nothing life-changing, but enough to matter. My parents handled everything. Weeks later, Daniel mentioned offhand that he'd used his share as a down payment on a condo. I waited. Days passed. Finally, I asked my mother, "Was there anything left for me?" She sighed, the way people do when they think you're being unreasonable. "We used it to cover family expenses. You're doing fine, aren't you?" I was. On paper. I had a steady job. I paid my rent on time. I didn't ask for help. And somehow, that meant I never deserved any. Years later, my parents started talking about the house. It was the house we'd grown up in, a modest 2-story place with a creaky staircase and a maple tree out front. My father liked to say it was their legacy. "We're thinking about the future," he told me one afternoon as we sat at the kitchen table, "about keeping things in the family." My mother smiled. "Daniel has such big plans. He wants to start a business someday." I nodded. I'd learned how to nod. They asked about my life, but only in outlines. Work. Still single, still renting. Then my father said, "You're good with paperwork, right?" That was me. Reliable. Useful. They began involving me more, asking me to review documents, to help organize bills, to explain things Daniel didn't have time for. It felt, briefly, like trust. When my mother's health started to decline, I was the one who took her to appointments. I sat beside her in waiting rooms, holding her purse, listening to her complain about how busy Daniel was. "He means well," she'd say. "He just has a lot going on." So did I. But I kept showing up. Eventually, my parents asked me to move back home temporarily. They needed help, they said, just until things stabilized. I hesitated. Something in my chest tightened. But they were my parents. I moved in. I paid for groceries. I covered utilities when things were tight. I fixed what broke. I managed their mail, their accounts, their insurance paperwork. I told myself this was what good children did. And for the first time, they leaned on me. Not emotionally, financially. Little comments started slipping out. "We wouldn't be in this mess if we'd invested earlier," my father muttered once. "Daniel's project just needs a little more time," my mother said another day, tapping her fingers nervously. I began to notice documents left out on the dining table, envelopes addressed to banks I didn't recognize, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. One evening, I overheard my father on the phone. "Yes," he said quietly. "We'll transfer it once everything's finalized." He looked up and saw me standing there. His face froze. Not guilty, exactly. Calculating. "We'll talk later," he said into the phone and hung up. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling I'd once traced glow-in-the-dark stars across. My stomach churned with a familiar feeling, the sense that something important was happening without me. Again. The next morning, my mother asked me to sign something. "Just a form," she said lightly, sliding it across the table. "To help us manage things more smoothly." I looked down at the papers. My name was already typed in. I didn't sign it yet. I smiled. I nodded. I said I'd read it later. And that's where part one ends. Because the moment I finally understood what they were about to do, what they had always been willing to do, was the moment everything changed. I read the document that night. I waited until the house was quiet, until the television in the living room murmured itself into silence and my parents' bedroom door clicked shut. I sat at the small desk in my old room, the same one where I used to do homework while listening to Daniel laugh on the phone with his friends. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. It wasn't just a form. It was a power of attorney. Limited, they'd said. Temporary. But the language was careful in a way that made my chest tighten. Financial authority, property management, the right to act in the best interest of my parents. And buried deeper, several pages in, was something worse. A clause referencing the house. I read it 3 times, slow, mouthing the words. My name appeared only once, as the agent, the helper, the facilitator. Daniel's name appeared repeatedly: beneficiary, future owner, successor. They weren't just asking for help. They were positioning me as the bridge, the clean hands, the responsible one who would make the transfer smooth. I sat back and stared at the wall. My heart didn't race. It sank. The next morning, I brought the papers to the kitchen table. "I have questions," I said. My father glanced up from his coffee, eyes already guarded. My mother's smile faltered. Just for a second. "What kind of questions?" she asked. "About the house," I said. "About why Daniel is listed as the beneficiary." My father exhaled through his nose. "We thought you'd understand." There it was again. "You understand." "I understand what?" I asked. My voice was steady, which surprised me. "That Daniel needs stability," my mother said, folding her hands. "His business is risky. This gives him security." "And me?" I asked. They exchanged a look. A quick, practiced exchange that said this conversation had already happened somewhere else. "You're capable," my father said. "You'll be fine." Something inside me hardened. So, I manage everything, I said slowly. I help you. I cover expenses. I sign documents. And in the end, the house goes to Daniel. My mother reached for my hand, her fingers cool. It's not like that. But it was exactly like that. I didn't sign. I told them I needed time. They didn't push. Not immediately. Instead, the atmosphere in the house changed. Politeness sharpened. Conversations became careful. My parents whispered more. Daniel started visiting more often, breezing in with his confident smile, clapping me on the shoulder like we were allies. "Appreciate you holding things down," he said once. "Couldn't do this without you." I smiled back. My jaw ached. Weeks passed. My mother's health worsened. Hospital visits became more frequent. I paid for parking. I picked up prescriptions. I answered calls from creditors my parents pretended not to hear. One afternoon, while my mother slept on the couch, my father asked me to sit down. "We need to talk," he said. He slid a different folder toward me. Thicker. Heavier. "This is temporary," he said, "just until your mother recovers." I opened it. It was a loan agreement. Not a bank loan. A personal one. From me. They needed money, they said. To consolidate debt. To protect the house. Just a short-term infusion. They promised repayment once things settled. Once Daniel's business took off. "How much?" I asked. My father named a number that made my throat go dry. "That's my savings," I said. "You're not using it," my mother said softly from the couch, eyes still closed. That hurt more than anything else. I looked at her, at the faint lines around her mouth, at how small she seemed. I told myself this was temporary, that this was family. "I'll need it in writing," I said. They agreed quickly. Too quickly. We signed that evening. I transferred the money the next day. After that, things unraveled fast. Bills still went unpaid. New expenses appeared. Daniel's visits became more urgent, his phone calls louder, his temper shorter. One night, I overheard him arguing with my father in the garage. "You said it was covered," Daniel snapped. "It is," my father said. "We're handling it." "With what money?" Daniel demanded. Silence. I stood in the hallway, my pulse thudding in my ears. A week later, I found a bank notification on the shared computer. A large transfer. Outgoing. Not to a creditor. To Daniel. I stared at the screen, the numbers swimming. The date matched the week after I'd transferred my savings. I confronted my parents that night. "You said the money was to protect the house," I said, holding my phone out. "You sent it to Daniel." My father didn't deny it. My mother cried. "He needed it," she said. "It was an emergency." "So is this," I said. "This was everything I had." My father's voice hardened. "Lower your tone." Something snapped then. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, internal click. "I want my money back," I said. My parents stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "We can't," my father said finally. "It's gone." "And the house?" I asked. "What happens to the house?" No one answered. That was the betrayal. Not just the money, but the realization that I had never been a child to them in the way Daniel was. I was a resource, and they had just used me up. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn, listening to the house settle around me, thinking about every receipt, every document, every conversation I'd managed on their behalf. They thought I was done. They were wrong. I didn't confront them again. That surprised me most of all. The old version of me would have argued, demanded explanations, chased apologies that were never coming. But something had shifted. Anger gave way to clarity, and clarity is quiet. I stopped asking questions out loud. Instead, I started listening. I began treating the house like a file cabinet with secrets tucked into every drawer. I learned which floorboard creaked loudest, which cabinet my mother never locked, which desk drawer my father always closed too carefully. I didn't rush. Rushing would have tipped them off. During the day, I played my role. I drove my mother to appointments. I made soup. I nodded when Daniel complained about stress and pressure and how no one understood how hard things were for him. At night, I worked. It started with the filing cabinet in the study. Years of documents, tax returns, insurance policies, bank statements, stacked in yellowing folders. My father liked to keep things old school. He trusted paper more than passwords. I photographed everything: account numbers, dates, signatures. Patterns emerged. Transfers that lined up too neatly with Daniel's visits, withdrawals just under reporting thresholds. A slow bleed of money disguised as family support. One night, I found a folder labeled Estate Planning. My hands went cold. Inside was a copy of a will. Not the will they'd mentioned in passing. Not a draft. A signed, notarized version dated 6 months earlier, right around the time they'd asked me to move back home. Daniel inherited the house. Not eventually. Not after conditions were met. Immediately upon their passing. I received nothing but a vague line about personal effects. I sat on the floor, my back against the filing cabinet, the paper spread across my lap. I studied the signature at the bottom. My mother's handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. My father's was firm. They hadn't forgotten me. They had decided. And they had done it while accepting my help, my money, my time. I didn't cry. I felt hollow, like someone had scooped something essential out of my chest and left an echo behind. I put the will back exactly where I found it. The next discovery came by accident. My mother asked me to retrieve a voice recorder from her nightstand. For the doctor, she said. She'd been documenting symptoms. I plugged it into my laptop to check the files. There were dozens of recordings. Most were mundane. Notes about pain levels, dates, medication times. Then I saw a file named Daniel, important. I hesitated. Then I clicked. My father's voice filled the room, low and deliberate. She doesn't need to know, he said, as long as the paperwork is clean. My mother responded, quieter. She'll be upset. She's always upset, he said, but she won't abandon us. She never does. I closed my eyes. The recording continued. We just need her signature, my father said. Once the house is secured, it doesn't matter. Daniel needs this. She'll understand eventually. The calmness in his voice frightened me more than anger ever could. I listened to the entire recording, then another, and another. They discussed the loan, my savings, the power of attorney, how to keep things simple if I started asking too many questions. There was no remorse, just strategy. I copied every file. I backed them up in 3 places, then I erased nothing. After that, I went silent. Not emotionally, strategically. I stopped offering money. When asked, I said I was tight this month. I stopped fixing things immediately. I delayed. I documented. My parents noticed, but they were distracted. Daniel's business was collapsing faster than they admitted. Creditors called more often. The house felt tense, brittle. One afternoon, Daniel cornered me in the kitchen. You okay? He asked, leaning against the counter. You've been distant. I looked at him. Really looked. He had my father's confidence, my mother's entitlement. He didn't look worried. He looked irritated. I'm fine, I said. He nodded slowly. Good. Because things are sensitive right now. We all need to be on the same team. I almost laughed. That night, I began planning. Not revenge, justice. I consulted a lawyer quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I brought copies, not originals. I laid everything out: loan agreement, bank transfers, the will, the recordings. The lawyer listened without interrupting. When I finished, she removed her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "They assumed you wouldn't fight," she said. I nodded. "They always do." She explained my options: words like undue influence, financial abuse, misrepresentation. She explained that the loan agreement mattered, that the recordings mattered more. And then she said something that made my pulse slow, steady. "You're not powerless here." I moved out 2 weeks later. I didn't announce it. I packed my things quietly, early in the morning. My mother watched from the doorway, confusion flickering across her face. "You're leaving?" she asked. "I need space," I said. She frowned. "This isn't the time." I looked at her. "It's the only time." My father didn't come out to see me go. After I left, I said nothing. No calls, no explanations. I let them wonder. Let the silence grow uncomfortable. Let them assume, as they always had, that I would eventually come back. Behind the scenes, my lawyer filed paperwork. We requested a formal accounting. We initiated a claim to recover the loan. We flagged the estate documents for review. Most importantly, we scheduled a mediation. They thought it was about money. They didn't know what I had, and they didn't know where this would end. The mediation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. My father insisted it be held at the community center downtown, the one with the glass walls and the overly bright lighting. Neutral ground, he called it. Somewhere reasonable. What he really wanted was witnesses. I arrived early. I wore a plain dark jacket, nothing dramatic. I brought a single folder and my phone. My lawyer arrived a few minutes later, calm and unhurried. She nodded at me once, the kind of nod that says you're ready, whether you feel like it or not. My parents arrived together. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her coat hanging loosely off her shoulders. My father walked a step ahead of her, chin raised, jaw tight. Daniel came last. He walked in smiling, phone pressed to his ear, laughing about something that didn't matter. When he saw me, the smile faded, replaced by mild annoyance. "This is excessive," he said, gesturing around the room. "We're family." I didn't respond. The mediator, a gray-haired woman with careful diction, called us to sit. A few other people lingered nearby: staff, a couple waiting for another meeting, a receptionist behind a desk. Not an audience exactly, but not private either. The mediator explained the process. My father nodded along, hands folded like he was at church. When she asked who wanted to begin, he spoke immediately. "This is a misunderstanding," he said, glancing at me briefly. "Emotions are high. My child feels hurt." My child. Not my name. He went on about intentions, about stress, about how families sometimes make decisions that aren't easy but are necessary. My mother dabbed at her eyes. Daniel stared at the table. Then the mediator turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I stood. For a moment, the room felt very quiet. I could hear the hum of the lights, the faint sound of traffic outside. "Yes," I said. "But I'd like to start with evidence." My father stiffened. I handed the mediator copies of the loan agreement, the bank transfer records, and the will. She read carefully, her expression changing incrementally, from neutral to concerned to alert. "This loan," she said, looking up, "was made by you?" "Yes," I said. "From my personal savings." "And it was transferred to—" She paused. "Your son." Daniel looked up sharply. "That was temporary." I didn't look at him. The mediator turned to my father. "Was repayment made?" My father cleared his throat. "Not yet." "And the will," she continued. "This excludes the lender entirely." My mother spoke then, voice trembling. "We didn't think it would come to this." I took a breath. "May I play something?" I asked. My father's head snapped up. What? A recording, I said. One you made. The mediator hesitated, then nodded. Go ahead. I pressed play. My father's voice filled the room. She doesn't need to know, as long as the paperwork is clean. My mother gasped softly, one hand flying to her mouth. The recording continued. But she won't abandon us. She never does. The words hung there, naked and undeniable. Daniel stood abruptly. This is taken out of context. I looked at him for the first time. Is it? I played another clip, then another. Each one peeled back a layer. Strategy, intent, assumption. The assumption that I would comply, that I would stay silent. When the recordings ended, no one spoke. The mediator removed her glasses slowly. This changes the nature of the mediation. My father's face had gone pale. This was private. It involved financial coercion, the mediator said. And misrepresentation. Daniel's voice rose. You recorded them? That's legal, my lawyer said calmly. And admissible. My mother started crying in earnest then, shoulders shaking. I watched her, feeling something complicated, grief tangled with relief. The mediator straightened her papers. Given the evidence presented, it appears there was undue influence and misuse of funds. My father slammed his hand on the table. We did what was best for this family. I finally spoke directly to him. You did what was best for Daniel. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I continued, my voice steady. You took my savings. You used my labor. You planned to leave me with nothing. And you assumed I'd accept it. The mediator cleared her throat. Based on this, restitution will be required. Full repayment of the loan, interest included. Additionally, the estate documents will need to be re-evaluated. Daniel looked panicked now. That house is not yours, the mediator said firmly. Not under these circumstances. Something shifted in the room. The balance of power, maybe. Or just the truth settling where lies had been. My father sank back into his chair, suddenly older. The mediator turned to me. Is there anything else you wish to add? I nodded. I've already filed for eviction. My mother looked up sharply. What? The house, I said. It's in my name. Silence crashed down. Daniel stared at me. What are you talking about? The deed was transferred years ago, I said. For tax reasons. You asked me to handle it. Remember? My father's eyes widened. He remembered. You said it was temporary, my mother whispered. So did you, I said gently. The mediator closed her folder. Then this matter is concluded. As we stood, people nearby pretended not to stare, but they'd heard enough. My father didn't look at me as he walked out. My mother paused, eyes red, mouth trembling. I didn't think you'd do this. I met her gaze. I didn't think you'd force me to. Daniel stormed past without a word. I stayed behind for a moment, breathing. For the first time in my life, I hadn't absorbed the damage quietly. I'd spoken, and everyone had heard. The eviction notice gave them 60 days. I didn't hand it to them myself. I had it served properly, through the court, the way my lawyer advised. Clean, impersonal, final. Still, my phone rang that night. I let it ring. Then again. Then a message appeared from my mother. Please. We need to talk. I sat on the edge of my bed in my new apartment. Small, quiet, mine, and stared at the screen. For a long time, I felt nothing. Then, finally, I typed back. We already did. After the mediation, things moved quickly. The court ordered full repayment of the loan, with interest. Daniel's accounts were frozen pending review. The will was suspended entirely while the estate was restructured under supervision. The house, my house, was no longer a bargaining chip. It was simply a fact. My parents tried to appeal emotionally when legally they had nothing left. My father showed up once, unannounced, standing in the parking lot outside my building. He looked smaller without the house behind him, without authority propping him up. "You didn't have to humiliate us," he said. I stayed by my car door, keys in hand. "I didn't." "You did." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I replied. I had to. My mother sent letters after that. Long ones. Apologies tangled with justifications. She wrote about fear, about pressure, about loving both her children in different ways. I read them once. Then I filed them away and didn't respond. Daniel didn't reach out at all. I heard through extended family that his business collapsed completely, that he blamed me, that he said I'd turned everyone against him. That wasn't true. The truth had done that all on its own. The eviction day came quietly. I wasn't there, but I got a call from my lawyer confirming it was done. No scene, no shouting, just boxes, movers, and the end of an era my parents thought they controlled. They moved into a small rental across town. For weeks after, I expected to feel triumph. Instead, I felt space. Space where anxiety used to live. Space where obligation had sat heavy on my chest. Space to think without bracing for disappointment. The house felt different when I walked through it alone for the first time. Not haunted, just empty. I opened windows, let air in. I repainted the kitchen. I removed the old photos, especially the ones where Daniel stood in the center and I hovered at the edge, half-cropped. I didn't throw them away. I just didn't need them on the walls anymore. Some nights were harder than others. I'd catch myself wanting to call my mother after a long day, or wanting my father's approval after a small success. Those habits run deep. But then I'd remember the recordings, the planning, the certainty with which they assumed my compliance, and the longing would fade, not into bitterness, into acceptance. Months later, the final settlement came through. The loan was repaid in full. The interest covered the legal fees. The remainder, small but symbolic, felt like a refund on years of silence. I used it to take a break. I traveled somewhere quiet. I sat by water. I slept without alarms. I thought about who I was when no one needed anything from me. When I came back, I started therapy. Not because I was broken, but because I wanted to understand why I'd been so willing to disappear for others. The answer wasn't simple. It never is. But it was freeing. My parents tried one last time around the holidays. An invitation, neutral wording, no apology, no blame, just an opening. I stared at it for a long time. Then I declined. Not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. I wasn't ready to pretend. And for once, I didn't force myself to be. These days, when people hear fragments of my story, they sometimes say, "I could never do that to my parents." I nod. "I couldn't either," I say, until I had to. Because here's the truth. I learned too late, but not too late to matter. Loyalty that costs you your dignity isn't loyalty. Love that requires your silence isn't love. And family doesn't get to own you just because they raised you. I didn't evict my parents out of cruelty. I did it because it was the first boundary they ever respected. And on the other side of that boundary, I finally found something I'd been missing my entire life. Peace.